The church smelled of lilies and candle wax, heavy with grief. Eleanor Hayes, 70 years old, sat in the front pew clutching the folded handkerchief her son Daniel had given her years ago. Her only child was gone, laid in the wooden casket draped with white roses. As the choir sang softly, the doors creaked open. Every head turned. In swept Vivian, Daniel's stepmother, the woman who had once stolen Eleanor's husband, and now, even in mourning, wore a mink coat and diamonds that flashed beneath the stained glass light. Her heels echoed against the stone floor like gunshots. She didn't bow her head in respect. She didn't even glance at Daniel's casket. Instead, she marched right up the aisle, slid into the pew beside Eleanor, and leaned close enough for Eleanor to smell the sharp perfume she remembered from decades earlier. "This land, this farm, his business. It belongs to me now," Vivian whispered, her voice dripping with entitlement. The words hit harder than any slap. Murmurs rose across the congregation. People exchanged glances, whispering in disbelief. The pastor hesitated mid-verse. Eleanor's hands trembled, but not from fear. She fixed her gaze on the casket, on her son's nameplate gleaming under candlelight, and whispered back, "Daniel already chose who it belongs to, and it's not you." In that instant, the battle lines were drawn, right there, in the sacred silence of her son's funeral. That night, the farmhouse was too quiet. Eleanor sat alone at the kitchen table, Daniel's favorite mug still on the counter. The old clock ticked on the wall, loud in the emptiness. Her chest felt hollow, like the grief itself had carved out her ribs. She pressed her palm against the cool wood of the table and whispered, "How could they? How could she come to your funeral and claim you like property?" Her voice cracked, echoing back at her in the silence. The memories pulled her under. She was back 40 years earlier, barely 30, standing on this very porch with her little boy clinging to her skirt. Her husband had loaded his truck, Vivian waiting in the passenger seat with red lipstick and a cruel smirk. "Farming is a dead man's game, Eleanor. You'll drown in debt," he had said. Vivian and I were starting fresh. And just like that, he drove off, leaving her with a crumbling barn, an 8-year-old boy, and bills stacked higher than the hay bales. Eleanor remembered Daniel's small voice. "Mama, don't cry. I'll help. I'll make this farm big one day." He'd been 10 when he started working beside her, 12 when he learned to plow, 18 when he vowed never to sell the land, no matter how hard times got. The flashback blurred into more recent memories, Daniel calling her late at night from his office, face glowing on the laptop screen. "Mom, investors want to expand. Organic, sustainable, Hayes Farms could feed half the state. We'll do it together." Eleanor wiped her tears. Daniel had kept his promise. He'd turned their once-broken farm into a $12 million business. And now, the same woman who had laughed at them as poor dirt farmers dared to claim it. Her grief hardened into resolve. She whispered into the empty kitchen, "You built this for us, Daniel, and I won't let her take it." The next morning, sunlight streamed weakly through the lace curtains. Eleanor wandered into Daniel's office, a room that still smelled faintly of cedar and fresh soil. His boots sat by the door, mud still clinging to the soles. She ran her fingers over his desk, the heavy oak one he'd bought with his first profits. Papers were stacked neatly, but a locked drawer caught her eye. The key, she knew, was taped under the bottom of the desk. Daniel had shown her once when he was proud of his secret hiding spot. With trembling hands, she unlocked it. Inside lay a slim binder with Daniel's handwriting on the cover. Legacy Trust. Her breath hitched. She opened the binder. Page after page of legal documents, notarized and signed, transferring every acre of Hayes Farms and every asset of his business into an irrevocable trust, naming Eleanor Hayes as the sole trustee. Tucked in the back was a handwritten letter. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know Vivian. I know how she thinks. Don't worry, I've built a wall she can't climb. The farm is yours to protect, not just for you, but for the next generation of farmers we'll help. Trust Whitmore, he knows everything. And remember, she can't take what was never hers. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, tears falling freely, not just from grief, but from fierce pride. Her boy hadn't only built a business, he had built a fortress around her. Her eyes landed on one more document, older and yellowed. A bankruptcy settlement from decades ago, signed by her ex-husband, relinquishing all rights to the land. The very signature that had once felt like betrayal now stood as her shield. For the first time since Daniel's death, Eleanor felt a spark of strength. Vivian thought she was walking into an easy victory. She had no idea she was stepping into a trap Daniel had set long before. That afternoon, Eleanor carried the binder and Daniel's letter to Mr. Whitmore's office, the town's old brick law firm that smelled of paper and dust. Whitmore, a calm man in his 60s with silver-rimmed glasses, looked up as she entered. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "I was expecting you. Daniel told me one day you'd come." He spread the documents on his desk with deliberate care. "This trust," he explained, tapping the binder, "is airtight. Daniel placed every asset, land, business, patents under your sole trusteeship. Vivian has no standing." Eleanor's hands trembled. "But she'll fight. She already came to the funeral announcing claims as if my son's coffin was a podium." Whitmore gave a thin smile. "Let her. The courts will choke on her arrogance." Then he slid forward the older document, the bankruptcy settlement. "This signature," he said, pointing to her ex-husband's name, "is the nail in her coffin. Your former husband surrendered all rights decades ago. Legally, Vivian is standing on nothing." Eleanor sat back, her grief sharpening into quiet steel. Over the next week, she prepared in silence. She gathered Daniel's photographs, showing their life together on the farm. She organized his journals, receipts, and business plans into boxes, documenting every step of their journey. She even cleaned the farmhouse, knowing Vivian would eventually come with lawyers, hoping to unsettle her. At night, she sat by the fire, Daniel's letter in her lap, whispering to herself, "You thought you'd left me defenseless, Daniel, but you left me stronger than ever. She doesn't even see it coming." The world outside thought Eleanor was a grieving widow lost in sorrow. Only she and Whitmore knew the truth. She was sharpening her silence into a weapon. The probate courtroom was hushed, sunlight filtering through tall windows onto polished wooden benches. Farmers in worn jackets and townsfolk who'd known Daniel all his life filled the gallery, curious to see the showdown. Vivian swept in like she was walking a runway, pearls gleaming, red nails tapping against her designer clutch. She flashed a triumphant smile at Eleanor, as if the outcome was already hers. Her attorney stood, smooth as silk. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Vivian Hayes is the surviving spouse of the late Mr. Robert Hayes. By extension, she is entitled to the estate and holdings of her stepson, Daniel Hayes." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Eleanor sat quietly, her weathered hands folded in her lap, face unreadable. Then Mr. Whitmore rose. His voice was calm, almost gentle, like a teacher correcting a foolish student. "With respect, Your Honor, Mrs. Vivian Hayes has no claim whatsoever, not legally, not morally, not historically." He placed a thick binder on the judge's bench. "First, Daniel Hayes established an irrevocable trust, naming his mother, Eleanor Hayes, as sole trustee of all property and business assets. That trust supersedes any spousal or step-parental claim." Vivian shifted in her seat, color draining from her face. Whitmore continued, sliding forward another document. "Second, as part of a bankruptcy settlement over 30 years ago, Mr. Robert Hayes, the very man Vivian married, relinquished all rights to the family farm. This document, signed and sealed, extinguished any possibility of inheritance through that line." The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the papers. This is decisive. Whitmore's final stroke was Daniel's handwritten letter, notarized alongside his will. In his own words, Whitmore read, Daniel Hayes explicitly excluded Vivian Hayes from any claim, citing her absence from his life and her history of exploiting estates. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. Vivian's lawyer stammered, flipping through his folder, clearly blindsided. Vivian, still trying to hold her composure, leaned forward and hissed at Eleanor across the aisle. You conniving old woman, you planned this. Eleanor met her gaze, steady as stone, and whispered back, No, Vivian, Daniel did. The first strike had landed, and Vivian knew this battle would not be the easy victory she'd imagined. The courthouse steps were crowded when the hearing adjourned. Reporters shoved microphones forward, townsfolk whispered in clusters, and camera shutters snapped like gunfire. Vivian stormed down the steps, her heels clattering against the stone. Gone was her icy composure from the courtroom. She spun toward Eleanor, who was walking slowly, supported only by her cane and unshakable dignity. You think you've won? Vivian hissed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the crowd's murmurs. You're a washed-up farm widow living off pity. That boy built an empire, and without me, it will crumble. You can't run a multi-million-dollar business from a rocking chair. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Someone in the crowd muttered, She has no shame. Eleanor paused on the steps, the autumn wind tugging at her gray hair. She turned, her eyes steady, her voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. Vivian, I've been running this land since before you even knew Robert Hayes's name. My son didn't build Hayes Farms for greed. He built it for community, for future farmers, and he trusted me, not you. Vivian's face twisted with fury. She lunged forward, jabbing a manicured finger at Eleanor's chest. You tricked him, you manipulated him into that trust. That farm should be mine. But before she could finish, a young farmer from the gallery shouted, That farm already belongs to the people Daniel trained. We owe our livelihoods to him and to her. Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. The tide of public opinion shifted right there on the courthouse steps. Vivian's mask cracked. Her perfect smile dissolved into a snarl, her voice rising, shrill and desperate. This isn't over. I will drag you through every court in this country until I get what's mine. Eleanor, calm as the stone beneath her feet, leaned on her cane and replied softly, so only Vivian and the front row could hear. The problem is, Vivian, you've never had anything that was truly yours. The words hit like a hammer. The crowd fell silent. Cameras clicked, catching Vivian's fury and Eleanor's quiet strength in the same frame. It was the breaking point. Vivian had revealed herself, not as a grieving stepmother, but as a vulture circling money, and everyone saw it. The second hearing drew an even larger crowd. The air inside the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Word of Vivian's outburst on the courthouse steps had spread through town like wildfire. Vivian arrived in black silk and oversized sunglasses, but her glamour couldn't hide the crack in her facade. Her lawyer shuffled nervously, already sensing the ground was slipping away. Judge Caldwell adjusted his spectacles. Mrs. Hayes, you may proceed. Vivian's attorney launched into a speech about moral standing and family loyalty, painting Vivian as the devoted stepmother Daniel secretly relied upon. But before the performance could gather steam, Mr. Whitmore stood, calm as ever. He placed a flash drive on the clerk's desk. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to play a video deposition recorded by Daniel Hayes prior to his passing. The lights dimmed. On the screen, Daniel appeared, pale but steady, sitting at his desk in the farmhouse office. His voice filled the courtroom. If you're watching this, it means Vivian Hayes is attempting to claim my estate. Let me be clear. Vivian was never part of my life, nor my business. She contributed nothing but disdain for my mother and this farm. I have chosen to entrust everything to the one person who never abandoned me, my mother, Eleanor Hayes. Gasps echoed. Vivian's lawyer buried his face in his hands. Daniel's voice grew firmer. This farm was built to support new generations of farmers. To anyone who believes Vivian should profit from it, know this. I excluded her deliberately because she stands for greed, not growth. The screen went black. Silence lingered like a final nail in a coffin. Whitmore then produced one last document, sworn testimonies from community members and business partners, confirming Vivian's total absence from Daniel's life and her reputation for exploiting estates. The judge leaned forward, his gavel poised. Given the trust documents, the bankruptcy settlement, the will, and now Mr. Hayes' own deposition, there is no legal or moral basis for Mrs. Vivian Hayes' claim. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. The gavel struck wood, sharp, final. Vivian's composure shattered. She slammed her hand on the table. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked. But the bailiff was already at her elbow, guiding her out as murmurs of relief and applause rippled through the gallery. Eleanor didn't gloat. She simply bowed her head, clutching Daniel's letter in her hands. The fight was over. Her son's voice had spoken from beyond, delivering justice in the most undeniable way. Weeks after the court's decision, autumn had begun to fade into winter. The farmhouse stood steady on the hill, smoke curling from its chimney, fields lying fallow but ready for spring. Eleanor walked the land at dawn, her cane tapping softly against the frozen ground. For the first time in months, she wasn't weighed down by fear. She looked out over the barns, the rows of soil Daniel had once tilled with his bare hands, and whispered, "It's safe now, my boy. No one can take it from us." The farm thrived, not under Vivian's greedy grip, but under the vision Daniel had left behind. The trust funded scholarships for local youths who wanted to farm, helped families keep their land, and created training programs in Daniel's name. His dream of sustainable farming was now a movement. At the dedication ceremony for the Daniel Hayes Foundation, young farmers lined up to shake Eleanor's hand, some with tears in their eyes. One young woman told her, "Because of Daniel's scholarship, I'll be the first in my family to run a farm. He gave me a future." Eleanor smiled through her tears, feeling Daniel's presence in every voice, every seed planted, every life changed. As for Vivian, she vanished from town, her name now spoken only in whispers. She'd arrived in mink and diamonds, but left in disgrace, remembered not as a grieving widow, but as the woman who tried to steal from the dead and failed. That evening, Eleanor sat by the fire, Daniel's letter resting in her lap. The crackle of the flames was the only sound. She read his words once more, hand trembling over his signature. "Mom, if she comes for what's ours, know I've already won, because I had you and she never did." Eleanor closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. The world had tried to strip her of everything, her husband, her security, even her son. But Daniel had turned betrayal into legacy. And as the night wrapped its arms around the old farmhouse, Eleanor whispered into the quiet, "Rest easy, Daniel. Your justice lives here, always."